Good morning, everybody. I hope you enjoyed last night if you went to the Kennedy Library. Had good food. We're going to have some good food tonight, too, so thank you for coming into Boston. Marty Walsh, the mayor of Boston, and the chair of the Housing Committee. I have two co-chairs, and I think they're still sleeping. Mayor Lorza had a long commute this morning from the room upstairs, so he'll be on his way. And Mayor Giles he should be here. They should both be here soon, so I want to thank him. Did he come in? Yeah, so, all right. So he flew in this morning. But I'd like to call this meeting to order. Thank everyone for coming this morning. Before I get started, I just want to just let you know how proud I am of chairing this committee here. In Boston, we've focused on building more housing over my first term as mayor. I'm in my second term now. Our population is at a 50-year high. We launched a housing plan in October of 2014 to create 53,000 units of new housing by the year 2030. We have 52,000 of those units, 26,000 in the permitting pipeline right now, 19,000 built, 7,000 under construction. So if everything goes as planned, by the end of my second term, we will have probably created 53,000 units of new housing in 8 years in Boston. So you can see the demand of population, what's happening. It's just growth here. But we're looking now at really moderate low-income housing and how do we build more of that. As many of you are facing, people being pushed out of the cities because people are being pushed into the cities, and we're losing poorer people. So we're working to try and do some creative things by using different tools that we have, different resources, or inclusionary development, linkage from the bigger developments. We raised the inclusionary development, the off-site affordability that people were having from 13 to 18%. We passed the Community Preservation Act here in Boston, which is an act that it gets matching. It's a 1% surcharge on people's homeowners' taxes, and we're able to put that money into historic preservation, open space, and housing. So we're trying to be creative here. It's not, as you all know, we're all trying to be creative. We're also trying to make sure that we deal with veterans and have veterans housing. We ended chronic veterans homelessness, as many of you did, in 2015. So our veterans right now, if they need a place to live and they're homeless, they can get into housing. We're working on ending chronic homelessness, and we're working on a whole host of different issues. So it's nothing that people at this table haven't done, but those of you that might be new, we just want to say, if you need help with something, you can come to see either myself, the co-chairs, or anyone at this table to help you with being mayor. Let's go around the table real quick, just to introduce ourselves, just so everyone knows who we are, because we do have some new mayors, and just so that you kind of get acclimated. All right. Second from the...
There we go.
Right.
My name is Jacob Fry. I'm the mayor of Minneapolis, and I'm not officially on the committee yet, but I'm proud to be here.
Mark Mitchell, Mayor of Tempe, Arizona.
George Fuller, Mayor of McKinney, Texas.
Marion Orr, Mayor of Fort Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Andy Burke, Mayor of Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Tito Brown, Mayor of Youngstown, Ohio.
Lucy Venice, Mayor of Eugene, Oregon.
Rich Strauss, Mayor of Chicopee, Massachusetts.
John Tecklenburg, Mayor of Charleston, South Carolina.
Mayor Melendez from Ponce, Puerto Rico.
Angel Perez, Mayor from Guaynabo, Puerto Rico.
Kirk Caldwell, Honolulu, Hawaii.
Jim Langfelder, Springfield, Illinois.
Christine Hunchovsky, Parkland, Florida.
Dean Trantalis, Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Wayne Messam, Miramar, Florida.
Tom Bunt, Richmond, California.
Jacques Roy, Alexandria, Louisiana.
Thank you. And just one thing, they've changed the format a little bit of the committees, that we're not going to do too much talking here. And I just want to say one thing that we are going to be responsible for, this committee, is to make sure that we continue to push the federal government against federal cuts. There's a lot of money that comes down to our cities from CDGB money, and also HUD money that goes into housing development. So we will be very aggressive in keeping an eye on the federal government when it comes to those pots of money, because every single one of our cities depend upon them for a whole host of different reasons. So we will make sure that as we move forward here, anything that can be done would be helpful on that. Now, just to go into regular order of business, My first technical order of business here is consideration of the resolutions. Anybody who has a new resolution, it will be considered after considering the proposed resolutions as a packet in front of you. At that time, we'll ask members to identify any new resolutions that will be presented. So if you have resolutions you want to present, we'll do it at that time. And right now, what I do, there's a list of resolutions in front of you. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. If you want me to read them, or if any questions on them.
I was going to move Mayor and Globo on the resolutions and allow for discussion purposes.
Okay. There's a motion to move on the resolutions. All in favor? Any opposed or concerns? All right, resolutions are adopted. Any other resolutions? Any other discussions? Anybody want to have breakfast? Let me just make sure we do this right now so we don't get any parliamentary now. Adjourn?
You can't, yeah, you can't.
All right.
You might want to.
Yeah, is there any topics that, while we got a couple seconds, anything that interests you or your city that you want to talk about for the next meeting, or we can work on? Like that, we have a bunch of great people here from the conference that staff this committee, and I also have in the city of Boston, we have an incredible chief of housing, Sheila Dillon, who's here, who does some incredible work as well. So, is there anything that you want to talk about, maybe next meeting, or challenges you might have?
Good morning, Mayor. You mentioned in your initial talks this 1% surcharge. Can you explain a little bit about what that is?
Sure. I'm going to have Sheila Dillon with me here from the city of Boston. This is the community
This is an honor.
community preservation.
Sure. So we passed a ballot question last November. It's a 1% surcharge on both commercial and residential real estate, and that money can be used for, as the mayor said, affordable housing, open space, and historic preservation. I'm hoping that the majority goes to affordable housing, and now we're working with the state to match that 1%. So it's going to raise roughly $20 million a year for Boston. And if we get the match from the state, which we used to have, but too many cities joined, that would be $40 million a year. So that would be great for us.
So it's not 1 mil.
It's 1%.
It's 1%. So
surcharge.
Is that on the value of the property?
Yes, it's a property taxes. Exactly right. So it's 1%
Of the value of the property. So
That's correct.
If the property is $500,000, it's 1% of that.
It's yes.
1% of the tax bill.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, 1% of the tax bill. 1% of the tax bill. So the way what happened was the legislature. I forget what year it was. I think I was there, and then 2000 something. We passed community preservation. I mean, we passed CPA to encourage cities and towns to come up with a tool to raise money for historical preservation, open space, and housing. At that time we funded a dollar for dollar match. The first few cities came in and did it because I don't think anyone thought that anyone would do it because you're raising taxes and the community is going to raise taxes and no one votes to raise their taxes on themselves. And so Boston was not part of that. We had I think there was about 60 or 70 cities. We tried it in 2001, I think, and it didn't get passed. So we did it again in 2017. 2015, and 70% of the voters in Boston voted for it, and we were able to get the business community to support it. So now what's happened is the first round of money is going out the front door, and a lot of the money is going into historic preservation, because if you think about our historic preservations in our cities, there's no money for that. There's money for parks. We put money in parks, and people can donate. Philanthropic people donate. We got money for housing because we can get it from different places, but no one wants to give you money to historic preservation. So we're seeing the benefit. Now the dollar, it's not a dollar for dollar match. It's 17 cents on the dollar. But it's still $20 million. So it's 1% on your tax bill. So whatever your tax bill is, 1% of that addition.
Okay, so it's additional, Mayor. It's not a carve out of the existing.
No, it's additional. It's additional. And on all the property.
It's a $40 average, I think.
Yeah, it's about $40 average in the city of Boston a year. Businesses pay a little more than $40. Yeah.
Tom Budd, Richmond, California. So is anybody having problems with HUD and public housing besides me? You know, HUD's in a death spiral. By their own admission, there's something like $26 billion behind in financing needed capital improvements to public housing. And so, you know, the problem we have is that we don't have enough money to maintain our public housing stock, and then HUD comes down and they sanction us and fine us and make life miserable for us because we can't meet the standards, but we don't have the money to do it.
Let me just grab this one first if anyone else wants to jump in. 2 years ago was the first time in the history of Boston that we had to use our general fund to offset the shortfalls in our housing development, in our Boston Housing Authority, which is all funded by HUD. We started to make some adjustments. Obviously, the director was laying people off and cutting staff, and that became a problem. So what we started to do, and we did it, what we're doing now in Boston is we're renovating our housing developments by using a public-private partnership. And we have companies coming in, and what they're doing is they're proposing right now, going through the process of knocking down housing developments, rebuilding housing developments for the people that live there, and then you reallocate, distribute the housing on the land, and doing a third low income, a third middle class, a third high end income. And what that's doing, that's helping us. And then we're getting in some cases we're getting a private operator to run our properties for us. We have to be creative on it because HUD's not being helpful. It hasn't been helpful in a while, quite honestly. I mean, I know we got a $30 million grant from the end of the Obama administration, but even though the shortfall was happening under the Obama administration because it wasn't being fully funded. So I would suggest that we have a really good director in Boston. You have to be creative on it, honestly, which doesn't help you. That's not a helpful answer. But what we're doing is trying to use some of that, and by I wouldn't say we're privatizing it. I'd say we're more getting an operator for some of the developments, and we're kind of using some of the additional money that we have and putting the allocation into other places. Because in our housing developments, we've noticed an uptick in violence, an uptick in shootings, and you know, and part of that's due to a lack of resources. Our police department now is taking more responsibility for patrolling the housing developments. We used to have a housing police department with a big force, and we're working. Our Parks and Recreation are trying to do more about cleaning the space around those. So we're trying to give them additional resources. Do that way. Yeah.
I think Mayor Butt was asking something. I was reluctant to do it. I wanted to bring it up myself. Years ago, when I've been 12 years here, I would be a little more forceful about bringing it up, but I would ask the chair, and I think you're particularly suited to do so, Mayor Walsh, that maybe for the Washington meeting, we have some folks here to discuss it. I'm going to be real brief, but I want to make sure that we're outlining what Mayor Butt's talking about. In Alexandria, we're in an Alicante city, not a large city, but enough to meet it. We have been administering AHA side, so the housing side, and then of course the CDBG side. We've been a model city for 20 years before I was mayor. For the 12 years I was here, we would teach the courses all around our state. We've had so much trouble on the housing side, I felt like there started to be a little punishment on the CDBG side. At the risk of Hamlet Act 3, which is he doth protest too much, let me just say that it's easy to sit here and say that, and then everybody wonders, well, maybe you did something wrong. Maybe we had the first time in the history of our city a request to pay back a certain amount or to pay it in our next allocation. We're absolutely innocent of the charge. In fact, there is a recording of the people from HUD telling us to change the way we were allocating the 3 to 4 national standards. So, right, you have your 3 or 4 goals depending on how you look at it. They come in and help you and tell you, look, you're going to have trouble meeting it here, or because cities, they don't allocate enough money anymore, you may say, okay, well, look, we have a CRA, a community redevelopment area that we can put in. It fits all of your goals. Let's allocate a portion in there. Does that meet it? Not only were we told to do it, we actually figured out how to do it under their normal standard. They came back and said, no, we like the new one better. In writing, I think one of my girls was becoming so paranoid with them down in community development, she ended up recording this long conversation. They instructed us to do it, put it in writing, came back and want to ding us because we followed their recommendation, and they say you shouldn't have listened to us. Literally, that's where I am. For 2 years, I've been trying to deal with it. So here's what happens, Mayor. You have a new allocation coming. You don't have clearance on your audit from 2 years back. It's already 1 year review look, right? Now you're 2 years back trying to administer new money without knowing what's back here. When Seti was chair, he helped. We went through hell to try to get this resolved for one city that this whole committee has jurisdiction over all this. But I'm just telling you, Mayor, I personally have been involved. I've personally looked at it with the lawyer's eye, with everything else. I'm sort of dug in deep on the weeds in this, understanding it, and you can't fix it. And somebody, I think, have to get them to be more accountable. And this is out of New Orleans office. I suspect I know some of the issues that I'm having is related to the housing authority side, but it's just not a good thing. We already have enough trouble administering this. It's critical to my city, as yours. And if we don't get some hold of how they need to move through these national standards, and we're being over-audited on things they're telling us what to do, and it's bureaucracy, Mayor, at its worst. It's literally, they don't know their rules as well as my person knows the rules. And I didn't want to say this in here. I hope there are no HUD people here, are there? No. You get worried.
No, but there is the Boston Globe guy behind you.
I'm not scared because I know where we stand on it, but I'm telling you, we have not been treated right on it, and this committee needs to do something about it.
What I'm going to do, Mayor, if you don't mind, I'd love to get both your numbers, and also we will see what we can do. I don't know if Seti's done this in the past, but if the committee wanted to, we could try and set some meetings up in D.C. because that meeting's not until winter. So if people would be interested, I'd be willing to set up a meeting and invite the whole committee down and just go down. And maybe while we're down there, do some of our own work in Congress to say we're part of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, we're part of the Housing Committee, and we're here to talk about housing issues, and then maybe identify a couple congressional and senators that we want to see down there. And I think if we show up as mayors across America, and people are like, wow, you have a good group of people, and there's Democrats and Republicans at the same table, and we were all fighting for the same issue. Right. If anyone's interested in that, we'll be willing to put that together. All right, so we'll talk. We'll set that up. That's aside from the conference. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Mayor, just to add in, from Wyoming, Cheyenne's the capital city. We've got the largest population. We, like you, are having to really look outside the box with public-private partnerships to make this work. I can tell you that if I didn't have the person that I have, because we are very low population and there are a lot of regulations, if I didn't have that individual working this program and her fine abilities, I don't know that we would participate. The second largest community, their city council voted just last week to no longer participate in the program. The rules are too onerous. The regulations are too high. The penalties are not worth it. For our communities, again, we're a small population. We're only talking, but only is really big when you look at our budgets, $350,000, $360,000. But we've decided that that's just not worth it to play. And so that community at least is no longer participating in the program, which is very, it's a sad state of affairs for our communities and those taxpayer dollars.
My council has it up too. I'm going to get it defeated, but they want me to address whether to give up CDBGs.
Yeah, you can't.
It's not a good thing.
Yeah, man.
Just to add to it, so Honolulu, we have the same problem between the region and Washington. We listen to the region and Washington says, no, you violated the rule, you've got to give money back. But as mayor, people, we're not going to give the money back. We want the money.
Yeah.
We need the money for housing. But it is difficult. The rules are onerous, and I think you hear different things from different levels. There's no trust for me, but we continue to play in the program.
Let me throw this out, and just so I'm not sure how the committee worked before, but maybe we can talk about doing it is setting up 2 or 3 conference calls, whether you or your housing people on it, a year to talk about, we'll have one, what the issues might be, talk about it, come up with an agenda, set up a trip to Washington, go down to Washington, anyone who can make it or a representative of your city, I'll go, and we will have the conversations down there, and then just have an ongoing dialogue, and then report back to the Conference of Mayors what exactly it is that we're doing. I mean, the resolutions are great, but I think by going to D.C. as a conference, it's a little more effective. And I think that showing up at their front door, knocking on their front door will be helpful. If that sounds like a good plan, we can do that. 2 or 3 calls. We'll pre-book them so you have some time. It can be morning, noon, or night. It doesn't matter. And we don't have to be on them. We can have our people on them, just so that we talk about what's going on and we'll coordinate. If that sounds like a plan. Yeah.
You mentioned the public-private partnerships. We're actually doing that. We're participating in the rental assistance demonstration program, and most of our properties we've put into that, and they're working fine. The problem has been that we have additional properties that haven't been approved for it, and we can't get them approved. I will give you one hint. I appreciate what Mayor Walsh said. I got so frustrated. I moved to dissolve our housing authority, and well, before I did that, the HUD people were saying, "You guys are doing a terrible job. If you don't get your act together, we're gonna take all your assets from you, and we're gonna assign them to another housing authority in the county." And I called up the county director and I said, "Do you want our assets?" He said, "Are you kidding me? I can't even run the ones I have." So I got back to HUD and I said, "They don't want it. You got somebody in mind?" And then I moved to dissolve the housing authority, and that actually got their attention. They called a meeting. We had a big teleconference with the local people, the Washington people, and they resolved to take care of some of the issues we have. But I'll tell you what, the last thing we want is for us to give all that stuff back to them, because they don't know what to do with it either.
I know you wanted to get out of here, Mayor, and we're now keeping you.
I'm not in a rush. I'm home.
We're in exactly the same thing as both my council's taking it up, as I said. We have had to try to, I know this sounds, I want to be careful. They want to push the housing authority side at any cost. I appoint everybody to that board. There is a lack of trust as a mayor from Honolulu. There is literally, this has become an issue. So they're forcing the housing side, and we're saying, look, we're not playing and helping on that. It's separate political subdivision from the city until you resolve these other issues. So now I've heard that 2 more times that's happening with other folks. This push between the housing side and the CDBG side. This is a problem. I moved globally on these. I'm for CDBG. I am 100% behind the goals, what it does, but this has to be fixed. They are trapping people at a bureaucratic level into fines, which, remember, you don't normally have to pay it out of your general fund. It can come out of your next allocation, but if you're 2 years back on audit, you all of a sudden build up. Then they say, perhaps, hadn't happened to me yet, I suspect it's happened to at least one mayor here, we want it out your general fund, write a check. Can you imagine being a mayor and going to the public and saying, I've got to write a check for $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, because somebody who has been trained for 12, 20 years to do this, they changed one little rule, told her how to do it, she did what they said, they have it memorialized, and they ding you for that kind of money. Yeah. It's not right.
Yeah. No, we'll get working on this right away.
Mayor Walsh, so you're building a lot of housing, 53,000 housing units. Yet Boston, like Honolulu, has some of the highest housing prices in the country. So you build supply, but demand is outpacing that supply. How do you find that balance to build housing that's affordable for your residents that live here, instead of having to move somewhere else, and the people who move in are the guys, I don't know, high income tech guys or whatever?
It's hard. It's hard. I mean, one of the things that we did the housing plan. Sheila's team put it together. They're in the midst of working on a new housing plan to kind of update numbers. Part of this was with our college universities. We have about 250,000 kids that come into Boston every year. Enrollment's gone up in those universities, so that means that throws off our housing goals for colleges, so we have to encourage them to build more on-campus housing. We're also partnering now with the Greater Boston mayors to look at this issue as a regional housing issue, because it is a regional housing issue. And we had meetings. Some of the mayors are here. I think Joe Sullivan from Braintree, Tom Koch from Quincy, Dolan from Medford. The mayors right around Boston, Greater Boston. So we're working with those folks on creating regional housing goals and plans. So that's another piece. And then we're looking at 20,000 of our units, middle income, 8,000 low income. So we're trying to constantly. So in 2016 we saw a stabilization of rents going up in Boston. We actually saw a decrease of 4%, and we were pretty excited about that because we're building housing. Like, okay, we're starting to see some gains here. And then 2017 they got wiped out. Rents are back up 4%. It went up 4% and then added a little more on top of that. So we are built. There's just such a demand for housing. So what we have to do, the approach we're taking now is building more housing in Boston, which is becoming an issue because people are saying not in my backyard. And the second thing is trying to get some of the cities and towns around Boston to build more housing so we can create a cluster of a regionalization of it. It has to be regional in Boston. You know, we're 700,000 people roughly. In Greater Boston, we're 2.4 million people. So we're a large city if you use the Greater Boston. So we need to get those cities to step up and build more housing as well. Yeah.
So Mayor, to me, this is at least for a city like Chattanooga, which is growing, has a booming tech industry. This is a real problem for us. We're doubling the number of people who live in our downtown, which is incredible for a mid-sized city. But we still don't have enough housing, and not only that, but because of the way that demographic trends are changing in a southern city, all that wealth is coming in and poverty is getting dispersed. It's putting more pressure on our homelessness dollars. And I think for us, when we see real estate prices climbing like they are, low-income housing just doesn't work without subsidy. Just the numbers don't work. Well, we've talked to the developers, it just don't work. And I get it. Like we live in America, it's a capitalist system. But what we don't see on a national level is a real discussion about how do you recognize that this delta exists and what are we going to do? And instead, it's just like, well, we're just going to keep working on these programs. We're not really going to have a discussion about the fact that low-income housing just doesn't work in growing, modern cities in that core where people need to live to get access to jobs.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what we do about that, whether it's how we change or get a toe in that discussion. But when places like Chattanooga, Tennessee, a old steel and foundry town, it's one thing to say Boston did it, which is phenomenal and it's great what happens here. But when cities like ours are seeing those trends, that means that there is true pressure around the country, and maybe some other cities are lagging behind, but they're all going to get there sooner or later, I think.
Some of the resolutions, and I know the resolutions, it depends on what we do with it. Resolution 19 addresses the affordable housing and homelessness, urges Congress to reject out maximum funding, maximize funding for several critical existing housing homeless assistance programs. So some of these resolutions get to that point. But again, I think that for us as a committee, I think there's an opportunity for us to take one or two or three issues and really pound it away this year. And I think one is obviously HUD and what's happening in HUD. I think the second one is exactly because there's more cities in America that are having a problem with finding displacement than not, and how do we do it? And what's happening, we have other cities part of our conference that are getting poorer people moving into their city that is changing the dynamics of their city as well. So I think that if we can figure out, as we do the first call, think about what are the 2 or 3 issues we should focus on and what should we push. Because I think that when we go down to Washington, I would like to say that I think they'll listen to us, but we know they won't. But I think we're laying down the foundation for this problem. This problem is not going away. And I think if we can push an agenda and talk about what we're doing, sharing best practices, I think it's key. I mean, so in Boston, in 2014, when I first got in this job, I brought in the business community to talk about, we're going to increase your number of inclusionary development number for low income, for the low income units. It was 13%. We moved it to 18%. The housing advocates want us to go to like 25%, and the the developers probably wanted us to go to 10%. But we end up at 18%, which allowed us in Boston, and obviously in different situation in a lot of cities because of all the development going on. I think we raised nearly 50-something million dollars the first couple of years, and I think we're close to 100 million now that's going into housing. We also have issues with expiring use, where housing units are low-income housing today, and then the expiring use is coming due, and we're trying to convince people to keep the housing low income, but we've had developments in Boston where they've turned it over, so now that adds to our problem of less affordable housing. So again, I think these are complex issues that if we want to continue to address these, I have no problem with coming up with a plan with all of us, not my plan, your plan, and we should pick 2 or 3 issues that affect different sized cities in America that we can actually go back to the conference and say to them, this is what we're doing. And I think that having a conversation at the conference on a global scale would not be a bad thing. We have a lot of different topics that we talk about from the podium, but I think housing is probably uniform the biggest issue for all of us across every single city in America. And I think if we could talk to Tom and Steve Benjamin that, in January, we might want to have a dialogue on housing, a major dialogue on housing, and bring in some people that can talk about it. Because I think even under the last administration in D.C., they were good, but the problem that Mayor Roy has, you still had the problem 3 years ago. So it was a problem in HUD. So I think that we have to really take a look at how do we do this. So I hear what you're saying, and that's one of the issues that we should probably put on our list. But I don't. Before the mayor speaks, I don't think we shouldn't take 10. We should pick 2 or 3 that we should really focus on, that we can actually try and make an impact. I think that's definitely one. I think HUD's 2, and maybe a 3rd.
Mayor Walsh, so
The second from the right, it's like a squiggly line. There you go.
Okay. It sounds exciting, but based on some of the discussion I've been hearing this morning, is there anybody in Washington who can speak with authority on the issues that you want us to address?
I have a cousin down there.
Yeah.
No, but I think the beauty is that, like us in Boston, the people in the Boston office are the bureaucrats, and this is one time where bureaucrats can be allies. That people criticize bureaucrats all the time, and I think it's important. There's bureaucrats in Washington, and I think we should request a meeting with Ben Carson and sit down with him. But more importantly, I think we should sit down with the people that are under him, that have been there for a career, and say that these are some of the challenges we have, because they ultimately, I mean, listen, we run our cities, but everyone behind us directs the policy. So there might be the right people. We could come across the right person. They might want us to be bang the drum. They might be waiting for us to show up at their front door.
True, but they'll probably just say, well, we can't make a decision, and it's the person above us that's holding us back. And we all know how bureaucracies work. We know how they work within our own systems. Yeah. So I think the challenge will definitely be there, but I think your goal is laudable. It's just, let's be careful that we're not expecting too much going into this.
No, we should bring our CMDV folks with, at least our top CMDV person. Each of us should be brought, and we ought to set up a meeting to be a technical meeting. Say, look, we're not coming to drink coffee, and we want to get into a
tactical, right.
They could get me in the weeds quick, and I know it fairly well, but they can't get Shirley, who works for me, in the weeds. Yep. She knows this backwards and forwards. And that's my point, Mayor. If she can't do it, we're looking at not doing it. Yeah. It's a too high of a cost.
So, and you're talking about, the conference goes by fast, and it's a year. By the time we're at the next meeting, it's a year from now, and I think if we could have some real connections made and maybe some push into some policy, you just don't know. And I think that I get it. I mean, I was a legislator before this, and it's frustrating. But I think if the cities can leave there with a contact person that they might not have had beforehand and help them a little bit, that's a benefit.
I think, Mayor Walsh, I think it makes a lot of sense, and that a lot of the lower level staff and even higher level staff at HUD are getting quite frustrated. I mean, I think one of the most recent proposals that I saw that came out of HUD was that they were going to solve the affordable housing crisis by increasing the rents, which is like kind of, it's actually kind of comical, but scary at the same time.
Good answer.
And so, you know, to the extent that we can build those relationships out with staff, I think makes a whole lot of sense. Something else that we're working on, and I think other cities may be touching on this a little bit as well. We've got this 4D program that we just pushed through in Minneapolis, and it's a program that allows for the retention of naturally occurring affordable housing. And now, you know, it's like 3 times cheaper to retain naturally occurring affordable housing than it is to build afresh. But and we're doing that by allowing up to a 40% abatement of property taxes if the landlord is willing to keep at least 20 or 30% of the units at or below 60% of area median income. And it's people are actually they're signing up for it quickly. And we've found that we've actually been able to retain a larger amount of affordable housing than with doing the same thing with a direct subsidy to build afresh. So I'm sure maybe other cities are working on that as well, but it seems to be quite effective.
Yeah. And I just looked at we have the thing in the next room introducing everyone.
I'll move to adjourn.
Yeah, before, a motion to adjourn second. Before we adjourn, we will send out, next week, we'll send the first contact to everyone, and we'll get the information, and then we'll do a call, and then we'll get our officers working and come down with 3 or 4 bullet points, and we'll throw some dates out for the fall, what works, and give it long enough information so you can clear schedules, and then I'd suggest as many mayors that can come, but make sure every city that's here that's interested be represented there. And we'll figure that out through the conference.